Hi, my name is Jeff Squires. I work for Cisco Systems, and I thought I'd give a short demonstration of how to use Mercurial in conjunction with Subversion for Open MPI development. Let me show you exactly how that works. I've done the first step already, which is to get a Subversion checkout of Open MPI. And in this case, I got a checkout of the trunk, and I put it into a directory called trunk4hg. So if we go into that directory, we can see that there's all the files and directories that we're used to seeing. And actually, if we show everything, we can see the .svn directory, which indicates that this is a Subversion checkout, and then all the things that you're used to seeing in an Open MPI Subversion checkout. Now, the first part of this technique, or the next part of this technique, is to actually make this directory be a Mercurial repository as well. So we run the hginit command, which runs very quickly, and we look and we see now there's a new .hg directory here, and that's the actual Mercurial repository itself, but it's empty. So we want to actually populate it with all the files that we just got from the Subversion checkout. But we do want to tell Mercurial to ignore all the .svn directories because that's all the metadata from Subversion, and we certainly don't want that in the Mercurial repository. So we create a .hg ignore file, and we put 2 lines in here. There we go. And this tells Mercurial to avoid all the .svn directories and everything that they contain. So now we're ready to run the hg-add remove command, and all this will do is find every file in this tree obeying the .hgignore file, so therefore it's going to avoid the .svn directories. And there we go, it's very quick, it finds everything. Now, just like Subversion, Mercurial schedules things, then you have to commit them to actually save them to the repository. So we've scheduled to add all these files to the Mercurial repository, and now we're ready to commit. But one thing before we do, we have a very token .hgignore file, the one that says just ignore the SVN directories. We actually want to get a fully populated one. And I'm going to cheat a little bit for purposes of this demonstration. I have one stashed around that I'll just download here. It's unfortunate that you can't really automatically create an hgignore file. You kind of have to populate it. I used a script at the beginning of time and I've hand tweaked it since. And so it's got all the things that I want to ignore in there. So I just stash it and get it when I create a new Mercurial exchange directory like this one here. So now wget is good at not overwriting files, so we'll move things here and put this in the right place. There we go. And just to give you a taste and see what it's like, there's a bunch of entries in there, so makefile.in and config.cache and all the things that you typically want to ignore. Now it's kind of important not to get this fully populated one first, because that may cause hg-add remove. Since we're using globbing, it may actually skip some files that are important to the repository. So you definitely want to do just the token hgignore first with the .svn, then hg-add remove, and then get a fully populated hgignore. But now we've got everything. We're going to commit to the repository, and we'll put in a commit message right here. We'll say svn trunk as of R18939. Go, and Mercurial is going to brain jam on that for a minute. It's got to copy everything into the local repository. Now, this is actually a local operation. The entire repository is in that .hg tree, so it basically copied everything down and saved the initial version of it. So if we do an hg log, it's going to say, oh, there's one revision so far, and it's just that initial import that we did. Now, if you look again, you'll see, okay, there's really nothing new here, just that hg directory and the Subversion directory. So this is a fully functional Subversion checkout and a fully functional Mercurial directory. But the important thing to remember is that this directory is only for exchanging information between the two systems. We do not do any active development here. Don't run autogen. Don't run configure. Don't run make. Don't modify the files and things like that. This is just for information exchange. So let's get out of here. And what we want to do is we want to clone this repository and do work in the clones. So we say hg-clone trunk, and we typically give the cloned repository, a name that has something to do with what we're going to do. So MCA base updates. I'm going to do some changes to the MCA base itself. So we let Mercurial brain jam on that for a second here because it's doing a big file copy. There we go. Copied 4492 files. And we go into MCA base updates and we look in here and, oh, look, Mom, there's no .svn directory. This is a pure Mercurial repository. And we can go in here and do all the changes we want. So let's say we make a change to the news file. And we come in here and we say some new cool version. There we go. And then let's also change, for example, the README file. There we go. And we'll come down here and we'll change the date to today, which is 17 July 2008. Go and run hgdiff, and we'll see the two changes that I've made there in news and in README. And then let's commit these guys here. And I'm giving pretty abbreviated commit messages. Normally you give something a little better than that. And wow, that's actually pretty interesting. If you're used to Subversion, you're used to seeing the upload of the file here. Remember that the Mercurial repository is local, so it's really just some local file operations, and it's very fast. Let's do another change here. Let's also change the version. Let's say I have decided that we're going to be working on Open MPI version 1.5, so we'll HGCI version. But let's use the editor here instead of just doing it on the command line. 1.5, there we go. And again, very fast because it's local repository. Now let's say I've finished development in this tree. I've done whatever I was going to do, and I want to push this stuff back up to the Subversion trunk so it's available to everybody else. So how do I do that? Well, if you recall, we made a clone. This repository is a clone from the trunk for HG repository, and Mercurial remembers that. So it remembers it as a parent that I'm going to be exchanging stuff with my parent. So I can look and see what is outgoing to my parent. And it's going to say, oh, you have two pending change sets that are going out to that trunk for HG repository there. So if we do an HG push, this is going to automatically push to my parent. See, oh, there it is. It's pushing to trunk for HG, and it found two change sets with three changes, the three files. That's very nice. So if we go into that trunk for HG and we run HG log, well, there's all three things, right? So the initial import and the two changes that I made. So what I can do is do an HG up to pull those changes into the local working directory here and say three files updated. There we are. Now here's the thing. Remember that this Exchange special directory is both a Mercurial repository and a Subversion repository. So if I run Subversion status, Subversion is going to see those three changes files, and it's going to say, hey, those are different, right? So if I do a Subversion diff, I can see the changes that came in from those three files that I just did in Mercurial. And then I could just Subversion commit changes from HG. Normally you give a much better message. This usually represents a bunch of development that you did for a while and you're ready to push back to the trunk for everybody else. You give a more detailed message. And I'm obviously not going to commit this here for the purpose of this demo here, so I'll just hit Control-C to get away from there. But that is how you would actually, have a direct linear sequence from your cloned repository up through the Exchange repository and then into the Subversion repository. Now let's look at it the other way here. Let's say you have a long-lived clone. You're off doing stuff and you're on there for a week or a couple weeks or a month or something like that. You want to sync to the trunk as often as possible. So you want to do a Subversion up. Remember, this is a fully functional Subversion checkout. So you can do a Subversion up, and let's see if anybody's done anything. It says, oh, look, there's a change since I did my initial import. So we've updated to R18941. So if we do an HG status, HG is going to say, oh, this is a new thing. Somebody's changed this file here. So I need to commit this and say update to SVN R18941. There we go. That's going to do that. And then we can go into our MCA base updates directory and do an HG incoming. And this allows us to say, hey, what does the parent have for me that I can pull? And say, oh, you have one thing waiting for you. So you can HG pull. There we go. And that pulled it into my repository, and then I HG up to get it into my local directory, and there we go. So I've just done a pull directly from Subversion through my Exchange repository and then into my local Mercurial repository, and I am good to go. One last thing I'll show you here is, remember, we have two repositories at the moment, the Exchange, trunk for HG, and then the one that I'm working on, MCA base updates. But there's nothing to prevent you from cloning trunk for HG as many times as you want. Let's say I'm going to make some changes to the OpenIB BTL. I can just clone trunk for HG again. And I have a completely separate repository where I can do all kinds of other stuff for OpenIB. So now if I look, obviously I have three repositories. I can push and pull between all of them, keep my changes different between MCA base updates and OpenIB changes and so on. So we found this to be a very useful technique. I hope this information is useful for you. Thanks.